I've mentioned a couple times that I consider it best practice to keep these two options checked under the advanced preferences in iTunes. Keep iTunes Media Folder organized and copy files to iTunes Media Folder when adding to library. This just makes sure that all the files you import are copied to your central iTunes library and that iTunes keeps the library and its folders organized. In this movie, I want to talk about what happens if you import content but didn't have copy files to iTunes Media Folder checked. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that and exit Preferences. In my folder called Video from the exercise files, there's a short movie called rocks.m4v. I'm going to drag that into my iTunes library. And there it is. So just as we've seen before, it's been added to the movie section of my library, and I can double-click it to play it. So you can see it plays just fine. Let's see where iTunes is playing it from, though. I'm going to right-click on it and choose Get Info. And under the Summary tab, I can see that this file is located in my user folder on my desktop in the folder called Video, and it's called rocks.m4v. So the copy I dragged into iTunes is the copy that iTunes is playing. It's playing the exact copy that we're looking at here in this folder. Because I turned the copy option off in Preferences, it did not make a copy of the movie and place it into my iTunes Music folder. Now technically, there's really nothing wrong with this. You can have your media files scattered all over various hard drives if that's the way you prefer it. iTunes can manage them just fine. In fact, even if you move the files, iTunes can still keep track of where they go. Just cancel that for a moment. And I'll just move this rocks file from inside this video folder to right on my desktop. If I double-click in iTunes again, it still plays. And if I pull up Get Info, you can see that iTunes know that it's now sitting directly on my desktop. And it doesn't even matter whether or not iTunes is actually running when you move the file. So if I were to quit iTunes, move the file back into the video folder, and open iTunes up again, and double-click, you can see the movie still plays. And if I right-click and Get Info again, you can see it knows it's back inside the video folder. So iTunes really can keep track of where everything in your library is really stored. But I personally prefer to keep all of my iTunes content in the main iTunes library folder. With files scattered all over the place, you run a much higher risk of deleting a folder of files that you thought you didn't need, only to discover much later that the folder contained a song or a video that you were managing with iTunes. So if you find yourself in a situation where your iTunes content is scattered all over your computer in various places and decide you want to bring them back into the main folder, first of all, go back to Preferences, under Advanced, and recheck Copy Files to iTunes Music folder when adding to Library. And you're only doing that just so in the future you don't run into that problem again where files stay in their original location without being copied into your iTunes folder. Click OK, and then go to File, Library, Organize Library. This opens a window with two checkboxes: Consolidate Files and Upgrade to iTunes Media Organization. We'll talk about the second option in the very next movie, but right now I'm going to check Consolidate Files. And what that's going to do is identify all the files in my library that currently reside outside my iTunes Music folder and make copies of them inside the folder and point to those files instead of the ones outside the folder. So I'll click OK. So now iTunes is going through and finding all the files that are currently stored outside of my iTunes Music folder, making copies of them, and placing them inside my iTunes Music folder. And now it's done. Let's see if I can still play this Rocks video. I sure can. Let's see where it is. And right there you can see it's now inside my user folder, Music, iTunes, iTunes Music, Movies, and Rocks. So it's actually created that folder called Movies for us in place of the file there. So that means I can actually now delete this video folder, or at least delete this file, rocks.m4v, sitting here on my desktop, because I now have a copy of it in my iTunes folder. So that's how you can bring in all the various files that might be scattered all over your hard drive and copy them into your iTunes Music folder.